Good, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Excuse me, my name is Bryan Hogan. I am a software developer, blogger, and podcaster. I've been making podcasts for just over 5 years. The start of this month was my 5-year anniversary. I usually release a podcast every 2 weeks. Not always, but almost. I get to speak to some of the best people in the industry and ask them questions about things that I'm interested in. It's a simple interview format done either in person or on Skype. My topics are always tech-related, but more than just tech. I've had things on C#, of course, .NET, quantum computing, repetitive strain injury, career, salary negotiation, accessibility, game development, and more recently even mental health and how to build a robotic arm for someone that's missing an arm. I even had one with a man who left software for beer, but it's not what it sounds like. People from large companies like IBM have been on, Microsoft, Google. I've also had people from small startups, independent consultants, and because I'm based in Boston, I tend to focus on people in Boston, give them an opportunity to speak. So I've had DraftKings, Runkeeper, Yesware, and also independent. After I make a podcast, I keep the relationship. I may make another podcast, or I may introduce them to someone, or they may introduce me to someone. Or, as has been the case, I meet people at conferences. I've made podcasts with Nicholas Blumhardt, and I met him this week for the first time. In London, I met Mads Torgersen and Mark Seaman for the first time, even though I've had relationships with them for years. Why do I do all this? It's because I love learning from people and sharing what I know. And that's why I spend an average of 5 to 6 hours of work per podcast, between arranging it, recording it, editing it, and releasing it. And the nicest compliment I get, and I've received it a few times, is that, "Hey Bryan, I love it that you shut up and let the other person talk." You learn a lot more by listening than by talking. And the rest of this talk will be about how I learn. I do my homework. I watch the person's videos, I read their blogs, I look at their books, because I want to ask good questions. Knowing more about a topic makes it easier for me to ask those questions. And good questions will be far better for my audience. It'll be easier for them to follow along, and they too will learn more. I try to establish a common understanding right from the start. When it's a topic I'm not familiar with, I am not shy to let the person know how little I know. But if it's a topic I know a lot about, I'll still establish the basics so that I know we agree on the fundamentals. I lay out my assumptions at the start, so I say, I think something works this way, am I right? I think a bounded context is. And if I'm wrong, fine. If I'm not, at least I know we agree. 60 to 70% of the time, when I'm on that Skype call, it'll be the first time I've spoken to the person. Ahead of time, we've agreed agenda, timing, had a few emails, things like that, but this will be the first time we've spoken. Before we start the interview, I tell them about my recording process, how to handle the microphones, what to do if there's a problem, if they want a break, they need to redo something, and we chit-chat a little bit. This usually takes somewhere between 10 minutes and 30 minutes. And at the end of that, everyone is very relaxed. I'm happy with their microphone, they're happy with their microphone. There's no background noises. I've been watching them for bad habits like scratching their stubble, playing with a fidget spinner, tapping on the table. All of these things are very bad for a recording. The audience will be annoyed. But because I've done this at the start, I probably will not need to interrupt them during the podcast, during the recording. I have had a few nervous people on. One of them turned to drink, had a glass of wine ahead of time, but he then at the end said to me that because I was so relaxed, he became relaxed. And relaxed people are far more talkative. So common ground established, everyone's relaxed, off we go to the interview. I look at the person. I watch their body language. I look for cues not to interrupt when they're in a flow, or if they need some help. I don't distract them. I sit still. I don't play with my hair. I'm not adjusting my mic. I'm definitely not reading the web because they'll see your eyes. I'm not checking my phone. If a person has been kind enough to give me their time, I'm going to give them my full attention, but I'm also going to be seen to give them my full attention. I'm respectful and I listen attentively. I always start with easy questions, things that they definitely know. It makes them more comfortable and more talkative. And it's usually interesting. Tell me about yourself, tell me about your job, what are you doing? Here is what I have found is the key to a good interview or podcast or a way of learning. You get them to tell you a story. People love stories. They love telling them, they love listening to them, reading them, writing them. I get the interviewee to tell me a story. And as you all know, the big thing about most stories is they have a start, a middle, and an end. With the interview, I don't jump around in topics. That would knock a person off their stride. It would confuse listeners and make the whole thing more difficult to understand. The start, middle, and end are very important. I think it was about a year ago, I made a podcast about commercial quantum computing in the finance industry. This was a topic I knew nothing about. We came up with an agenda that looked like this. What you'll notice, hopefully, is that it has a definite start, where we get with the basics, a middle, where we go into the details, and an end, where we wrap it up and summarize it for the listener. So again, start, middle, end. Another very important thing is not to argue and to be hard on your own opinions. Accept that what a person is telling you is true to them. They've taken the time, they're not going to lie to you, they're not making it up. That is their opinion. I do not argue. Disagreeing is fine, giving a counter opinion, but then I move on. And I definitely do not push my opinion on the interviewee. I am there to learn from them. Once I know we disagree, move on. When you learn from someone in this kind of scenario, your conversation should be kind of like two people sitting on the grass, sunny day, blue skies, no clouds, talking happily. It should not be like this. I'm going to play a video in the next slide. Two people talking. Keep an eye on how they know when it's their turn to speak. They know how to listen to each other. They've got great use of body language. And they also laugh at each other's jokes. Oh. All right. I think everyone could learn something from them. Good questions are very important. I keep my questions brief, clear, and to the point. I do not want to confuse the person. I do not want to waffle on. Following an agenda, like I showed you, also helps. Each question builds on the previous, making it easy for the person to understand what I'm asking, but also why I'm asking it, because context is important with questions. If you jump around, you lose that context and continuity, and it can be harder for the person to interpret your question, and it's definitely harder for the listener to follow along. Though I keep my questions brief, I try to avoid yes-no questions, because you might get a yes-no answer. I try to guide with the questions. Tell me what is something. Why would I use it? How do I use it? What else could I try? That gets a person talking, and it gets you a nice story. This is an example of my audio at the end of a recording of a podcast. My audio is on top, and the interviewee is on the bottom. I introduce, I ask some questions, I make an occasional comment, but 90% or more of the audio is theirs. That's what I want. I want them talking. I don't want to focus on me. If a person doesn't want to answer a question, don't keep asking it. They may already have given you an answer and they're not going to go any further. Move on. That was only 12 seconds. It may have felt longer to some people. Silence is very powerful when learning and talking to someone. It's tricky to use. Even in this short time, a few of you may have felt uncomfortable, and others might have been relaxing and enjoying the silence. If the person needs quiet, give it to them. Gives them a chance to think, and then they'll answer. But it can be harmful. It'll make some people uncomfortable. It'll make them clam up. In that case, help out, jabber on a bit, ask them the question a different way, throw in a comment. Generally, I don't interrupt. I try to wait for natural pauses, so I'm watching the person. Or if I need to, I'll signal them somehow, like a little sharp intake of breath, I'll mouth something. The only times I interrupt are when I think something is unclear, but it's important that it needs to be clarified. I think something is wrong, then I'll interrupt. Or if I think the answer has become unfocused or taking too long. Sometimes a follow-up question is better than interrupting because it's politer. But there is a bizarrely polite way to interrupt a person, and it's not to start saying the thing that you want to say, it's to say, I'm going to stop you there, or may I interrupt you? And people don't feel offended, it doesn't become confrontational, and they'll probably let you make your point. As of a few weeks ago, I have made 123 podcasts. I've learned more than I could have imagined 5 years ago about an incredibly wide variety of topics. On a personal note, the podcasts on repetitive strain injury and career advancement, and my interview with Dylan Reisenberger, he's the creator of Poly. That was my first step towards a pluralsight course on Poly, have all had a direct and long-lasting impact for me. And obviously my podcasting has landed me here in front of you talking about podcasting and interviewing. In summary, how I learn from people. I prepare. I know enough to ask good questions. I have an agenda. I make sure everyone's relaxed. I get a story, learn a lot, and make a friend. And here is a final word from our little friends. Thank you.